He's the only president other than Herbert Hoover who's lost more jobs than he had when he began, since Herbert Hoover. The idea that he did something that was significant in the military and have him decide on what your circumstances are, whether you need help. The idea that states are able to do this is a little like saying, look, there's so many young women who have been, including a young woman who just was murdered, and he went to the funeral. The idea that she was murdered by a third time is between the doctor, between the woman and the state. The idea that the politicians, that the founders wanted the politicians to be the ones making decisions about women's health is ridiculous. I'm not saying that no terrorist ever got through, but the idea they're emptying their prisons, we're welcoming these people, that's simply not true. There's no data to support what he said. Four-star general standing to your side who was on your staff who said you said it, period. That's number one. And number two, the idea that I have to apologize to you for anything along the line. I've never heard so much foolishness. This is a guy who wants to get out of NATO. Are you going to stay in NATO? He's going to pull out of NATO. The idea that we have, our strength lies in our alliances as well. And all those people, every one of those who are convicted, deserves to be convicted. The idea that they didn't kill somebody, just went in and broke down doors, broke the windows, occupied offices, turned over desks, turned them over statues. The idea that those people are patriots, he said, no, I'll tell them to stand by. The idea he's refusing, will you denounce these guys? The idea that I did anything wrong relative to what you're talking about is outrageous. It's simply a lie, number one. Number two, the idea that you have a right to seek retribution against any American just because you're president is wrong. All you have to do is listen to what was said at the time. And the idea that somehow that's the only reason I ran. I ran because I was worried a guy like this guy could get elected. And the idea that he's talking about all this being fabricated, we saw with our own eyes. We saw what happened on January 6th. Inflation is still hurting them badly. For example, I provided for the idea that any black family, first-time home buyer, should get a $10,000 tax credit. I don't know where the hell he's been. The idea that anything he said is true. You find ourselves in a position where the idea that we're not doing any, we put more police on the street than any administration has. We're in a situation where the idea that he is claiming to have done something that had the cleanest water. The idea is that we, in fact, we were the only ones of consequence who were not members of the Paris Accord. But the idea that he claims that he has the biggest heart up here and he's really concerned about when they're 18 years old. The idea that they're going to, I'm proposing that everybody, they pay, the idea that we don't need to protect our seniors is ridiculous.
President Biden?
The idea that veterans are not being taken care of, I told you before, number one. Number two, the idea that we're going to be in a situation where all these millions and millions, the way he talks about it, no one wants to screw around with us. Nobody, number one. Number two, the idea that we're talking about worse presidents. I wasn't joking. The idea that he is doing anything to deal with child care. He did for virtually nothing to child care.
President Biden, you have 40 seconds left. Would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I would. The idea that somehow we are this failing country. There's a thing called Article 5. An attack on one is an attack on all, and required response. The idea, I can't think of a single major leader in the world. And I tell you what, I doubt whether you'll accept it because you're such a whiner. The idea, if you lose again, you accepting anything, you can't stand the loss. Something snapped in you when you lost the last time.
He came to me with the idea, and it was a great idea. It's one of the most successful economic development acts